The wind screams a mournful dirge across the obsidian plains of volcanic rock. Snow, driven by relentless gusts, scours the landscape, burying any object foolish enough to remain still. In Iceland, winter is not an arrival, but an engulfing presence, a suffocating shroud that blots out the sun for months on end. Temperatures plummet, flirting with the absolute zero of survival. Tempestuous storms, born in the frigid depths of the North Atlantic, unleash winds of unimaginable force, capable of felling a grown man like a sapling. Imagine, then, the plight of the 9th century Norse settlers, brave but unprepared, who first set foot on these inhospitable shores. They faced a monumental challenge, one that would demand every ounce of their resourcefulness and test the very limits of their endurance. How does one build a home, a sanctuary against the elements, in a land utterly devoid of trees? These Vikings, seafarers who had braved the ocean from their Scandinavian homelands, were accustomed to the familiar comfort of timber halls. They knew well the art of crafting these sturdy structures, long, rectangular buildings boasting vertical wooden walls and steeply pitched, shingled roofs, designed to shed the heavy burden of winter snow. They were skilled in working with oak and pine, masters of splitting logs into precisely cut planks, adept at raising frames capable of withstanding the relentless onslaught of the seasons. But the shores of Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands presented a stark and unforgiving reality. Here, they found landscapes almost entirely barren of forests, a treeless expanse that stretched to the horizon. Only the most meager, scattered birch scrub clung desperately to the windswept hillsides, a pathetic reminder of the forests they had left behind. No majestic oak, no sturdy pine, only endless fields of rock, hardy grasses, and compacted peat stretching as far as the eye could see. The question facing them was not merely an architectural puzzle, it was a matter of existential survival. Winter in the North Atlantic is a merciless adversary, offering no forgiveness for even the smallest of errors. A poorly insulated dwelling meant a slow, agonizing descent into frostbite, hypothermia, and ultimately death. Fuel was a precious commodity, fiercely guarded and carefully rationed. Daylight, the lifeblood of the world, vanished for months, plunging the land into an oppressive darkness. Even the very earth itself froze solid, becoming an unyielding, impenetrable mass. Faced with these seemingly insurmountable odds, the Norse settlers made a daring, counterintuitive decision, a choice that would ultimately define their ability to survive and even thrive in this unforgiving land. They ceased their futile battle against the environment and instead began to collaborate with it. They turned the frozen ground beneath their feet into walls, a shield against the biting wind. They roofed their homes with layers of hardy grasses, creating a natural, living blanket. They even burrowed their dwellings into the earth itself, creating structures so intimately integrated with the landscape that, from a distance, they appeared to be nothing more than grassy hillsides adorned with inviting, albeit unassuming, doors. These were the legendary turf houses, longhouses whose walls were constructed from precisely cut blocks of peat and sod, meticulously stacked to create barriers thick enough to trap precious body heat and durable enough to withstand the relentless forces of nature for generations. And remarkably, they worked. Inside these earthen halls, families huddled together, enduring months of darkness and bone-chilling cold, finding solace and warmth with nothing more than a single open fire and the remarkable insulating power of the surrounding soil. This is the story of how the Vikings, driven by necessity and fueled by ingenuity, engineered their survival in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth, using the very elements that threatened to extinguish them. The first and most pressing challenge was a scarcity of materials. Back in mainland Scandinavia, timber was abundant, a readily available resource that fueled their construction projects. A Norse chieftain, commanding a team of skilled laborers, could fell a dozen mighty oaks and raise a respectable hall in a matter of weeks. But in Iceland, the reality was far different. Only a scant 30% of the island could even support the most minimal of birch woodlands. And even these trees were small, stunted, and pathetic, bearing no resemblance to the towering pines of Norway that they so fondly remembered. Archaeological surveys of early settlement sites confirm what the Vikings quickly discovered. They were facing a timber famine of unprecedented proportions. Good, reliable structural wood simply did not exist. But what they did have in abundance was turf. Beneath the thin, windswept layer of grass that covered much of the island lay thick, extensive deposits of peat, a dense, compact material composed of partially decomposed plant matter. This peat could be carefully cut into blocks, much like bricks, and easily stacked to form walls. The blocks were surprisingly light, making them easy to carry, yet heavy enough to remain firmly in place once positioned. And crucially, peat possessed a property that would sorely lacked. It was an extraordinary insulator. The unique cellular structure of the decomposed plant fibers trapped air in countless tiny pockets, creating a natural barrier against the relentless cold. A wall of turf a mere meter thick could hold heat inside far more effectively than a wooden wall of any comparable thickness. And so, the Norse began to cut. With sharp spades, they sliced rectangular sods from the hillsides, each block roughly the size of a loaf of bread, the roots of the grass still stubbornly tangled throughout the topsoil. These turfs were carefully stacked in a distinctive herringbone pattern, each layer angled slightly inward so that the immense weight of the wall pressed inward rather than outward, preventing the structure from collapsing under its own considerable weight. Walls rose slowly, patiently, block by painstaking block, until they stood an impressive 1 to 2 meters thick. From the outside, these walls appeared almost alive, a testament to the enduring power of nature. The grass on top continued to grow, thriving in its new environment. Roots, like tenacious fingers, knit the blocks together, creating a seamless, integrated structure. In the summer months, vibrant wildflowers bloomed on the roof, transforming the dwelling into a riot of color. The house became virtually indistinguishable from the land itself, blending seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. But turf alone could not support the considerable weight of a roof. For that critical component, the Norse desperately needed timber. And timber, in this new and unforgiving world, was the most precious resource imaginable. They simply could not afford to waste it on walls or floors. Every beam, every plank, every scrap of wood had to count. And so, they turned to the vast and unpredictable ocean for salvation. Arctic currents, those fascinating and powerful forces of nature, became their unlikely providers. Rivers in Siberia, the Ob, the Yenisei, the Lena, carried meltwater from the vast taiga forests northward towards the Arctic Ocean. And with that water came a precious cargo. Logs, trees felled by violent storms, eroded from riverbanks, and swept away by spring floods. These logs drifted into the Arctic Ocean, where they became entombed in the grip of the ever-expanding sea ice. The ice, a frigid and unforgiving prison, moved slowly, inexorably, over months and even years. Carried by currents that circled the pole, it drifted westward across the top of the world. Some of it melted off the coast of Greenland, releasing its wooden treasures into the sea. Some continued south, past the jagged shores of Iceland. And when it finally broke apart in the relatively warmer waters, the logs it carried were released, freed from their icy confinement. To the Norse settlers in the north, this was nothing short of divine providence. Driftwood washed up on Icelandic beaches in quantities that varied wildly from year to year, a fickle bounty of the sea. But when it arrived, it was treated with the reverence and care typically reserved for sacred relics. Coastal landowners held legal rights to any timber that came ashore on their property, a privilege they guarded jealously. Men would labor tirelessly to haul the heavy logs inland, where they would be carefully dried and then meticulously split. A single, sturdy beam could frame a doorway, adding a touch of elegance to the otherwise rustic structure. A handful of carefully selected posts could support a roof, providing the essential framework for the entire dwelling. The wood did not need to bear the immense weight of the walls. The turf took care of that. Its sole purpose was to hold up the roof and provide a basic skeleton for the structure. Archaeological excavations of early Norse houses reveal that builders would often use large, unsplit logs when driftwood was particularly abundant, a sign of prosperity and good fortune. However, as supplies dwindled over time, as the readily available driftwood became increasingly scarce, they adapted, demonstrating their characteristic ingenuity. Later generations learned to split logs lengthwise, effectively making two beams from one, a clever way to stretch their limited resources. They recycled timber from abandoned buildings, carefully dismantling old structures and repurposing the materials. They even imported small amounts of timber from Norway at great expense, a testament to its enduring value. Every scrap of wood was saved, reused, and passed down through generations, becoming a treasured heirloom. In a world where most building materials were renewable, where one could always cut more turf from the hillsides, wood stood alone as irreplaceable, a symbol of enduring value. The construction process itself was a systematic and labor-intensive undertaking, a testament to the dedication and perseverance of the Norse settlers. First, builders carefully chose a site, often on a gentle slope, to aid in drainage and prevent the buildup of moisture. They leveled the ground, creating a stable platform, and then laid a foundation course of flat stones, carefully selected and meticulously placed. These stones served two critical purposes. They prevented the turf walls from sitting directly on the damp soil, which would inevitably lead to rot and decay, and they provided a stable base that could bear the immense weight of the earthen structure, distributing the load evenly. In Greenland, even churches, those sacred spaces of worship, employed this construction method, utilizing stone footings topped with thick turf walls that could be over 1.5 meters thick, a testament to the effectiveness and widespread adoption of the technique. Once the foundation was firmly in place, the wooden frame went up, a skeleton of carefully crafted supports. Vertical posts were sunk deep into the ground or set securely on stone pads, providing the primary support for the roof. Crossbeams connected these posts, creating a rigid and stable framework. A ridge pole ran the entire length of the building, forming the spine of the roof and providing essential support. This frame was deliberately minimal, designed to be just strong enough to hold the structure's shape without consuming excessive amounts of precious timber. Then the real work began, the turf work. Builders meticulously stacked sod blocks around the frame, angling them inward at approximately 45 degrees, creating a distinctive and structurally sound wall. The walls rose slowly, deliberately, each course laid tight against the one below, ensuring a secure and airtight fit. At full height, the walls could be nearly 2 meters thick at the base, providing exceptional insulation and structural integrity, tapering slightly as they climbed, creating a visually appealing and structurally efficient design. The roof was the next critical component. Rafters of driftwood were carefully laid across the ridge pole, spanning the width of the building. Over these rafters went more turf, layer upon layer, until the entire structure was completely covered in a thick blanket of earth and grass. From above, the house appeared as nothing more than a long, green mound, a natural extension of the landscape, with a single, unassuming door at one end, inviting entrance. Snow would pile on top in winter, adding yet another layer of insulation, further protecting the inhabitants from the elements. Rain would soak into the turf and then slowly drain away through the network of grass roots, keeping the interior dry and comfortable. The house breathed, settled, and gradually became an integral part of the hillside, an organic and harmonious structure. Most Norse turf houses followed a rectangular plan, a simple yet effective design. These were longhouses, aptly named, as their dimensions were often quite substantial. Lengths varied from 12 meters to over 20, providing ample living space for the entire family, while widths typically ranged from 4 to 6 meters. The main room, the hall or scaly in Old Norse, was the heart of the home, the center of all activity. This was where the family lived, ate, worked, and slept, sharing their lives in close proximity. At the center of the hall was the hearth, the life-giving source of warmth and light. The hearth was not a fireplace in the modern sense, with a chimney and flue. Instead, it was a simple pit dug directly into the floor, lined with stones, and filled with burning peat or driftwood. There was no chimney to carry the smoke away. Instead, smoke rose slowly towards the roof, where it escaped through a small hole, a vent called a jori in Old Norse. This hole was deliberately small, just large enough to allow the smoke to escape without letting too much precious heat escape along with it. On windless days, smoke hung thick inside the hall, stinging eyes, blackening the turf walls and wooden beams with soot, creating a smoky and somewhat oppressive atmosphere. Managing the fire was a constant task, a never-ending responsibility. Someone had to tend it constantly, feeding it fuel, carefully adjusting the smoke hole to regulate the flow of air, and keeping the coals alive throughout the long, dark night. But that fire, small as it was, made life in the turf house possible. It was the key to survival. The physics of the turf house worked like this. Heat from the hearth radiated outward in all directions, filling the space with warmth. In a typical wooden building, much of that heat would escape quickly through the walls and roof, dissipating into the cold air. But in a turf house, the thick earthen walls absorbed the heat and held it, acting as a thermal sponge. Turf has an exceptionally high thermal mass, meaning that it takes a long time to warm up, but once it is warm, it releases that heat slowly and steadily, providing a consistent and reliable source of warmth. The walls themselves became warm to the touch, radiating gentle heat into the room. The air inside, trapped by the low ceiling and minimal openings, stayed warm even when the fire burned low, creating a cozy and comfortable environment. Body heat from the inhabitants added to the overall warmth. So did the breath of the family, the steam from cooking, and the ambient heat generated by the daily activities of life. All of it accumulated inside that earthen shell, creating a unique and self-regulating microclimate. The result was a remarkable feat of engineering. Outside, the temperature might plummet to 20 degrees below freezing, the wind howling at 40 miles per hour, but inside, nestled beneath 2 meters of insulating turf, the air could be warm enough to sit comfortably in shirt sleeves, a testament to the ingenuity of the Norse builders. Excavation reports from Greenland and Iceland suggest that interior temperatures in well-maintained turf houses could be tens of degrees warmer than the air outside, a truly remarkable achievement. The house functioned as a thermal battery, storing heat during the day and releasing it at night, buffering the inhabitants from the wild and unpredictable swings of the Arctic climate. The layout of the house further reinforced this efficiency. Along the sides of the hall, builders constructed low benches from wood or stone, providing seating during the day and serving as beds at night. Family members slept side by side, often with animal hides or woven mats for padding, seeking warmth and comfort in close proximity. Guests and hired laborers might sleep there, too, sharing the limited space and warmth. Everyone clustered around the fire, drawn to its life-giving heat. This wasn't just a matter of tradition or custom, it was a matter of survival. The closer you were to the hearth, the warmer you stayed. Spreading out would waste precious heat, reducing the overall efficiency of the dwelling. So the architecture itself enforced communal living, physically arranging people in the most thermally efficient configuration possible. In some houses, additional rooms were attached, expanding the living space and providing specialized areas for different activities. A beef or cattle or sheep might adjoin the main hall, separated by a partition wall, but sharing the same roof, allowing the warmth generated by the animals to contribute to the overall heating of the house. The Vikings understood the benefits of this symbiotic relationship. They didn't heat the barn, they let the barn heat the house. In wealthier households, there might be a separate kitchen or a storage room, providing additional space for food preparation and preserving valuable resources. But these were secondary spaces, less important than the main hall. The hall and its hearth were the center of everything, the heart and soul of the turf house. Lowering the floor was another clever trick employed by Norse builders to maximize warmth and minimize exposure to the elements. Many turf houses were partially sunken, dug into the ground so that the floor level sat below the surrounding terrain, creating a semi-subterranean design. This design reduced exposure to the relentless wind and tapped into the Earth's natural insulation. Below the frost line, the ground maintains a relatively stable temperature year-round, providing a natural source of warmth in the winter and coolness in the summer. By sinking the house into this zone, builders ensured that the floor itself wasn't radiating cold upward, chilling the inhabitants. The earth banked around the walls provided an additional thermal buffer, protecting the structure from the worst of the elements. Wind couldn't scour the walls directly, reducing heat loss. Snow would drift over the roof, adding an extra layer of insulation. The house, in effect, hid from the weather, seeking refuge in the embrace of the earth. But this strategy wasn't unique to the Norse. Across the Arctic, other cultures, facing similar challenges, arrived at the same ingenious solution. In Labrador, Inuit families built winter houses from blocks of mossy turf with wooden frames and central hearths, sheltering communal groups through the coldest months. In Alaska, the Thule people, ancestors of modern Inuit, constructed pit houses using driftwood and whalebone frames covered in turf, creating durable and well-insulated dwellings. Some of these structures are over 3,000 years old, and they look remarkably similar to Norse turf houses, sharing the same rectangular plans, thick earthen walls, low entrances, and central fire pits. The physics don't change with culture. Cold is cold. Earth insulates. Fire warms. Humans everywhere figured this out, adapting to their environment and developing innovative solutions to the challenges they faced. Even in Scotland, where Norse settlers established thriving communities in the Orkney and Hebrides Islands, turf became the standard building material. Excavations at sites like the Broch of Bursey revealed 10th and 11th century Norse hall houses with stone and turf walls stretching over 20 meters in length, showcasing the enduring influence of Norse building techniques. These houses featured central hearths, earthen floors, and the same semi-subterranean layout as their Icelandic counterparts, demonstrating the widespread adoption of this efficient and practical design. The technique spread wherever the Norse went, adapted to local conditions, but fundamentally unchanged, a testament to its enduring effectiveness. But turf houses were not without their drawbacks. They required constant maintenance, a never-ending cycle of repair and renewal. Sod rots over time, succumbing to the forces of nature. Grass dies, leaving the walls vulnerable to erosion. Rain erodes the exposed surfaces, gradually washing away the precious earth. Every few years, the outer layer of turf had to be replaced, new blocks cut and stacked over the old, reinforcing the structure and ensuring its continued integrity. Roofs especially needed constant attention. Water pooling on the roof could seep through the layers of turf, soaking the interior and creating damp, uncomfortable conditions. The roof had to be returfed regularly, the grass kept trimmed to prevent excessive growth, and drainage channels cleared to ensure proper runoff. The house was a living thing, demanding constant care and attention. Neglected, it would slowly collapse back into the hillside, becoming just another part of the landscape. This constant renewal meant that turf houses rarely lasted more than a generation or two without major repairs, requiring a significant investment of time and labor. Yet, despite the challenges, the footprint of the turf house endured. When a house fell into disrepair, a new one might be built on the same foundation, using the same stone base, following the same familiar floor plan. Over centuries, layers of occupation accumulated, creating a rich tapestry of history beneath the surface. Archaeologists excavating Norse sites often find multiple phases of construction, each layer revealing a glimpse into the lives of the people who once called these places home. Old walls are buried beneath new ones, hearths are rebuilt atop older hearths, and floors are raised as debris and ash pile up, creating a unique record of human activity. The house became a palimpsest, a surface on which each generation wrote over the last, leaving their mark on the landscape. Social structures shaped the house, and the house, in turn, shaped social life, creating a close and intimate relationship between the built environment and the community it sheltered. In medieval Europe, architecture screamed status, loudly and clearly. Kings lived in imposing stone castles, symbols of their power and authority. Nobles had timber manors, demonstrating their wealth and influence. Peasants made do with wattle and daub huts, simple and humble dwellings that reflected their place in the social hierarchy. But in Iceland, this rigid hierarchy collapsed, at least in terms of housing. Everyone, from the wealthiest chieftain to the humblest farmer and the lowliest laborer, lived in turf. The harsh environment was the great equalizer, erasing the visual distinctions between social classes. You couldn't build a stone castle when there were no quarries to provide the necessary materials. You couldn't raise a grand timber hall when there were no forests to supply the wood. So even the wealthiest families lived under sod roofs, their status subtly displayed in other ways. Status, when it was displayed, happened inside the turf house, within the confines of the hall. A rich chieftain might line his hall with finely carved wooden panels, imported at great cost from distant lands, showcasing his wealth and refinement. He might have a house within a house, a small timber structure built inside the larger turf shell, offering superior warmth and a greater sense of prestige. But from the outside, his home looked remarkably the same as a poor farmer's, a grassy mound with a door, blending seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. This architectural uniformity was unusual for the time and reflected the harsh realities of life in the North Atlantic, where survival depended on cooperation and shared resources. Nature didn't care about rank or social standing. Cold didn't discriminate, afflicting rich and poor alike. Survival depended on the same basic strategies for everyone: building a warm and sturdy shelter, conserving fuel, and working together to overcome the challenges of the environment. Yet, the hall was more than just shelter. It was the center of family identity, the place where lineage was traced and honor maintained. Sagas written centuries later still remember the halls of famous chieftains, immortalizing them in the collective memory of the Norse people. Jarl's Hall at Bergthorshvoll, Egil's Hall at Borg. These weren't grand palaces, but they were deeply meaningful places, imbued with history and significance. The hearth was where oaths were sworn, where disputes were settled, where stories were told on long winter nights, binding the community together with shared narratives. The fire was witness to everything, a silent observer of the dramas and triumphs of daily life. Religious life, too, centered on the hearth, reflecting the importance of the fire in Norse culture. Before Christianity arrived in the late 10th century, Norse families practiced a form of paganism that involved household rituals, honoring the gods and spirits who were believed to influence their lives. The head of the household, often acting as a gwa, a chieftain priest, would make offerings to the gods and spirits at the family altar, which was often located near the hearth, further emphasizing the sacred nature of the fire. The fire itself had symbolic weight, representing life, warmth, and light, essential elements for survival. To let the fire go out was to court disaster, inviting hardship and misfortune upon the family. After conversion to Christianity, much of this symbolism transferred to the new faith, adapting old traditions to new beliefs. Small turf churches were built using the same construction methods as houses, demonstrating the enduring practicality of the technique. These churches were low, rectangular, sod-roof structures, often indistinguishable from secular buildings, except for a cross marking the entrance, a subtle symbol of their religious purpose. Inside, a small hearth still provided warmth during services, echoing the traditions of the past. The architecture didn't change, only the rituals performed within it were transformed. Some scholars argue that the layout of Norse halls carried cosmological meaning, reflecting the Norse understanding of the universe. The orientation of the building, the placement of the hearth, the division of space, all might have reflected Norse beliefs about the structure of the cosmos. North and South could represent different realms, the world of the living versus the world of the dead, or the human realm versus the supernatural. East and West might correspond to masculine and feminine domains, or day and night, creating a symbolic representation of the world within the walls of the turf house. This interpretation is speculative, based on later interpretations of saga references and ethnographic parallels, but it suggests that the turf house was more than just a functional object, a simple shelter from the storm. It was a symbolic space, embedding the family's place in the cosmos and connecting them to the wider world. The decline of turf houses came slowly, gradually, as Iceland and Greenland integrated into European trade networks, opening up new possibilities and changing traditional ways of life. Imported timber became more accessible, making it easier to construct more conventional buildings. By the late Middle Ages, some wealthy families began building hybrid structures, combining traditional techniques with new materials, utilizing stone foundations, timber frames, but still cladding the exterior with turf for insulation, a blend of old and new. In Greenland, the Norse settlements eventually failed entirely, abandoned by the 15th century as climate conditions worsened, making life increasingly difficult and supply lines from Europe frayed, leaving the settlers isolated and vulnerable. The turf houses there stood empty, slowly collapsing back into the earth, returning to the elements from which they were formed. In Iceland, turf construction persisted much longer, enduring for centuries. Well into the 19th century, rural Icelandic farms were still building with sod, clinging to the traditions of the past. The method worked. It was cheap, effective, and perfectly suited to the landscape. Only with the advent of modern materials, concrete, steel, industrial lumber, did turf finally fall out of use, replaced by more modern and efficient building techniques. Today, a handful of preserved turf houses remain, carefully maintained as museums, offering a glimpse into the past. Glomber, Laufes, and a few others stand as reminders of a time when Icelanders built their homes from the ground up, relying on the resources available to them and demonstrating their remarkable ingenuity. Modern architects have rediscovered the principles behind turf houses, recognizing their value in creating sustainable and energy-efficient buildings. Earth-sheltered buildings, green roofs, passive solar design, all borrow from the same basic logic that guided Norse builders 1,000 years ago. Soil insulates, creating a natural barrier against temperature fluctuations. Thermal mass stabilizes temperature, reducing the need for artificial heating and cooling. Minimizing surface area reduces heat loss, conserving energy and lowering utility bills. These aren't new ideas. They're ancient ones, refined by necessity in the harshest climates on Earth. The turf house stands as a testament to human adaptability, a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. Faced with an environment that offered almost nothing, no timber, no stone suitable for large structures, no metal, no surplus of anything, the Norse made do, adapting their skills and resources to create a sustainable way of life. They turned grass into walls, transforming the very ground beneath their feet into a protective shelter. They harnessed ocean currents to deliver timber from forests they would never see, utilizing a renewable resource to build the essential framework for their homes. They dug into the frozen ground and made it a shelter for themselves, finding warmth and security in the embrace of the earth. And in doing so, they managed to survive, not just scraping by, but thriving. They raised families, built communities, composed sagas, and explored new lands, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to inspire awe and admiration. The ingenuity wasn't in grand innovation, some revolutionary breakthrough, but in an attention to detail, in understanding how heat moves, how water drains, how wind scours, how fire consumes, the fundamental principles of survival. It involved stacking 10,000 turf blocks to form a wall, each block carefully cut and precisely placed. It required the careful splitting of a single log to make 2 beams, maximizing the use of a precious resource. It demanded the endless tending of a hearth that couldn't be allowed to go cold, a constant reminder of the fragility of life in a harsh environment. The turf house was a machine for living, designed not by engineers with advanced degrees, but by farmers, fishermen, and families who had no choice but to get it right, whose very survival depended on their ability to adapt and innovate. Centuries have passed since the last Norse family huddled around a peat fire in a sod-roofed hall, sharing stories and finding comfort in each other's presence. But the lesson endures, a timeless reminder that survival isn't about conquering the environment, dominating nature with force and technology. It's about understanding, working with, and transforming its raw materials into solutions, adapting to the rhythms of the natural world. The Vikings didn't have the luxury of importing what they needed. They couldn't simply order supplies from afar. They had to use what was there, what the land provided. Soil, grass, driftwood, stone. These were the humble materials they used to build their homes, shelters that lasted for generations, sheltering entire families through winters that would have been fatal to anyone less resourceful. In the end, the turf house was more than just architecture. It was a philosophy, a way of life. It said that no environment is too harsh, no resource too scarce, if you're willing to think differently, to challenge conventional wisdom and embrace new approaches. It said that the ground beneath your feet, the grass you walk on, the very soil you're standing on, these can be transformed into shelter, warmth, and safety if you have the ingenuity and determination to make it happen. It's a reminder carved into 1,000 grassy hillsides across the North Atlantic, a silent testament to the power of human adaptation. It shows us that human ingenuity doesn't always look like soaring towers or gleaming steel, grand monuments to technological prowess. Sometimes, it appears as a simple mound of earth with a door, quiet and unassuming, yet warm inside when the world outside is frozen solid, a beacon of hope in the face of adversity.